Imagine a disease where every single day counts, where, delaying treatment by just a few months could actually change your long-term quality of life. That's the reality for people with multiple sclerosis. And for doctors, there's always been this razor-thin margin. How do you diagnose it fast, but without making a mistake? Because a misdiagnosis can lead to years of the wrong treatment. For decades, the gold standard for this has been the Mcdonald criteria. But medicine, well, it doesn't stand still. Today we're doing a deep dive into a really monumental shift, the 2024 Mcdonald criteria revisions. This isn't just a small tweak.
Oh, not at all. It's a systematic overhaul, really, driven by some incredible new discoveries. So our mission today is to unpack these revisions from the International Advisory Committee. That's a joint effort by ETRIMS and the NMSS. The core goal, the main takeaway here, was to create a single, unified approach for diagnosis that works for everyone, from kids all the way to older adults.
All while keeping that diagnosis super specific.
Exactly. It's about getting to treatment earlier, but only for the right patient. We're going to be looking at some big changes, new anatomical locations for diagnosis, new high-tech imaging biomarkers, and updated guidance for some special populations.
Okay, let's unpack this. The last big update was 2017. Why the urgency for another one so soon? It feels like our understanding of MS has really hit an inflection point.
It absolutely has. The pace of research has been, well, just incredibly fast, especially in our understanding of MS pathophysiology and how that shows up on advanced MRI and in cerebrospinal fluid, the CSF. There's this growing feeling that the 2017 criteria, as good as they were, still made clinicians wait too long. They had to wait to confirm what we call dissemination in time, or DIT.
And that waiting period is when damage can occur.
Precisely. This update moves MS diagnosis toward what we call a biologically based system. You see this in other areas like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, where the focus is on finding biological proof of the disease, not just waiting for symptoms to progress. MS is making that leap now.
And this wasn't just a few experts in a room. This is a global standard we're talking about, correct?
Exactly. This was a massive international consensus conference, 56 contributors. They really wanted to ensure these criteria would work anywhere in the world. And they affirmed two sort of fundamental principles.
Okay.
First, they have to be geographically agnostic. And second, that these paraclinical tests, so MRI and lab work, are now absolutely essential. Clinical history is still the foundation, of course, but you need that objective proof.
To rule out the mimics.
Yes, to rule out the mimics. Things like NMOSD or MOGAD, which could look so similar to MS but need totally different, and I mean totally different, treatments.
Right. Okay, so that brings us to the first big structural change, which involves dissemination in space, or DIS. This is about where the lesions are. The source material notes a huge addition. The optic nerve is now a fifth location.
This is a huge win for sensitivity. It's a game changer. Before, we only counted 4 spots: arioventricular, juxtacortical, infratentorial, and the spinal cord. Adding the optic nerve just reflects reality. Optic neuritis is so often the very first sign of MS.
And now you can officially count it.
Now you can count it, and that speeds everything up.
So how do clinicians actually prove the optic nerve is involved? Especially if, a high-res MRI of the eye isn't easily available everywhere. This has to work globally.
That's a great question, and it's where these new high-precision tools come in. The committee was smart about this. They allowed for a couple of different methods. First is something called optical coherence tomography, or OCT.
The eye scan.
The eye scan, exactly. It measures the thickness of the retinal nerve layers, and when those layers are thinner, that's objective proof of damage from something like optic neuritis.
So you can actually measure the aftermath of an attack.
You can. They set really specific thresholds. An inner eye difference of 6 micrometers or more. The point is, it's not just a patient saying, my vision was blurry. It's objective, quantifiable proof of neuronal loss.
Okay, and the other tool?
The other one is visual evoked potentials, or VEPs. This is an electrophysiology test. It basically measures how fast visual signals get from the eye to the brain. If that signal is delayed, it proves there's been demyelination along that pathway. Again, it's another way to find objective proof that might not even show up on a standard MRI, especially if the event was months or years ago.
So now we have 5 locations, the 4 old ones plus the optic nerve. How does that change the actual rule for meeting DIS?
It's simpler now, and the bar is a little lower. DIS is fulfilled when you see typical lesions in at least 2 of those 5 regions. And it doesn't matter if those lesions are causing symptoms or not.
I see.
And there's an even faster path for people with a really classic presentation. If you see lesions in at least 4 of the 5 locations, well, that high burden of disease is considered enough for a diagnosis right then and there.
Assuming there's no better explanation, of course.
Of course.
That makes a lot of sense. If it's everywhere, it's very likely MS. Now, let's get to what I think is the most provocative change here. For years, you needed both dissemination in space and dissemination in time, DIT. But the 2024 criteria say DIT is no longer mandatory in some cases. That's a fundamental shift.
It is. It's really the cornerstone of this whole update. The committee was very clear that making people wait months for a second attack or for a new lesion to show up on a follow-up MRI, it just unnecessarily delayed treatment.
So now we have tools that can stand in for the passage of time.
That's the perfect way to put it. We have these highly specific imaging and lab biomarkers that can prove the underlying pathology of MS is active. So we don't need to wait anymore. They can substitute for DIT.
Okay, let's look at those substitutes. First up, the central vein sign, or CVS. What is a central vein actually telling us about an MS lesion?
It tells us about the lesion's origin story, you could say. MS plaques, characteristically, form around tiny little veins or venules. So when you see that central vein running through the middle of a lesion on an MRI, you're essentially getting biological confirmation that it formed in a way that is typical for MS.
And not for other things like vascular disease.
Exactly. It boosts your diagnostic specificity. It helps you rule out those mimics.
But this sounds tricky to spot. How do you make sure it's not just subjective?
It can be. So they set a pretty tough threshold. They call it the Select 6 method. CVS is considered positive when 6 or more of the white matter lesions have that central vein.
6 or more.
And if the person has fewer than 10 lesions in total, then the majority of them have to be CVS positive. It's a strict rule to avoid false positives.
But does every hospital have the MRI powerful enough for this? I've heard you need a 3T magnet, at least.
That's a really important caveat. You can see it on the more common 1.5T MRI, but the detection rates are much lower, like 50-something%. On a 3T MRI, it jumps up to almost 80%. So because of that variability in tech, CVS is a powerful tool, but it is not mandatory.
Okay, but if you can prove it, what does that mean for the patient?
It means speed. For someone with their first ever attack, what we call a clinically isolated syndrome, or CIS, if they have lesions in at least 2 regions, and you can show CVS positivity with that Select 6 rule, that's enough for a full MS diagnosis.
Wow, so you skip the DIT waiting period completely.
Completely. You can start treatment immediately. It's a huge leap forward.
Okay, biomarker number 2, paramagnetic rim lesions, PRLs. These are about chronic active disease, right?
They are, and they're incredibly powerful. A PRL is basically an old inactive lesion core that's surrounded by this rim of activated iron-filled immune cells. That iron rim tells you there's still chronic, smoldering inflammation happening right at the edge of the lesion.
And that's very specific to MS.
Extremely. Systematic reviews put the specificity at 98%. If you see a paramagnetic rim, it is almost certainly MS. It's a biological smoking gun.
So how are PRLs used in these new rules?
They're used as a specificity booster in tricky situations. Let's say a patient has symptoms and lesions in only one part of the brain, but they do have DIT or positive CSF. If you've also find 1 or more PRLs, that's enough to lock in the MS diagnosis. It provides that final piece of the puzzle.
Got it. Okay, moving from the scanner to the lab. The old gold standard for CSF was oligoclonal bands, or OCBs. But now there's something called the kappa-free light chain index, or KFLC.
Yes, and this is a huge practical improvement. OCB testing is scientifically great, but it's slow, it's labor-intensive, and the results can be a little subjective. Different labs, different people can sometimes read them differently.
So KFLC is the modern alternative.
Exactly. It's an equivalent and interchangeable alternative. The big advantage is that KFLC is a number. It's objectively quantifiable with automated methods that are cheap and fast, and it matches up with OCB results about 90% of the time.
So it just makes this crucial test more accessible and reliable.
It democratizes it. Now, positive CSF can be determined by either OCBs or the KFLC index.
So we've got new locations, imaging shortcuts, a modernized lab test. It really feels like we're moving towards seeing MS less as a series of attacks and more as one continuous biological process.
That's absolutely the philosophy here.
Yeah.
And you see it in the move toward a unified criteria framework. The committee basically said the differences between progressive MS and relapsing MS are more about quantity than quality. So a single diagnostic framework now applies to both.